There's been a lot of talk lately about how good is Terence Crawford's resume. What has he accomplished in sport? A lot of people debating if he's pound for pound number one or not, how great of a fighter he is. In this video, I'll just be doing a quick career resume breakdown of Terence Crawford, breaking down his best wins and pretty much all of his major or at least semi-significant wins since he's been on the scene in the sport of boxing. I want to break all of them down one by one, tell you guys what each win means in my opinion, how good the fighter was, etc. So I'm going to start this video off. The first time I saw Terence Crawford fight, I'm not going to talk about these fights much because they really didn't mean much. The first time I saw him fight was against Bradis Prescott, then Alejandro Sanabria, and then Andrei Klimov. I'm not going to acknowledge any of those three fights because I feel even though they were nice little development fights for Crawford, they add absolutely nothing to his legacy. First fight that adds something to his legacy, March 1st, 2014 in Glasgow. He took on champion Ricky Burns. Ricky Burns was 36-2-1. He was the current WBO champion at 135. And before Terence Crawford took him on, he was on a very long run. He was relatively dominant. I mean, yes, he had the Raimundo Beltron fight right before that. Many people felt he ended up getting a gift draw against Beltron. But before that Beltron win, he was on a huge win streak. His last defeat prior to the Crawford one was all the way back in February of 2007. He was on a large win streak. He had multiple title defenses, and he was a good name. And as we saw later on in his career, when you look at his fights later on, when he took on even guys like Lee Selby back in October of 2019, or even throughout his career way after when he became a champion again at 140. I mean, yeah, he wasn't an amazing fighter. He's not a first ballot Hall of Famer or anything, but he's a nice opponent, and Crawford fought him when he pretty much was in his prime, won a very dominant and very wide unanimous decision victory. Yes, the judges had it 8-4, 9-3, so they didn't have it super dominant, but anyone that saw the fight knew it was very dominant. And Crawford went overseas. He went to Ricky Burns' backyard, taking him on in Scotland, one of the few Scottish champions you've had lately, and he made a statement in a very good win. After that, in June of 2014, he took on undefeated Yuriorkis Gamboa. Now, Yuriorkis Gamboa was a fringe pound-for-pound level fighter. It was a really good win. A lot of people discredit that win by claiming that Gamboa was moving up in weight to take on Terence Crawford, but that wasn't his first fight at 135. He took on Darles Perez previously, who was 28-0 in his own right, and got a victory. So Gamboa was not new to 135. He was new, but it wasn't his first fight there. That excuse does not work at all. It's a very unfair excuse to use against Terence Crawford. Crawford fought him, won a war, and ended up stopping him. But when you look at Gamboa in his career, he was a really good fighter. He was very dominant at 126. He moved up to 130, had one fight at 130, beat Michael Frenis, then beat Darles Perez at 135, and then fought Crawford. Yes, he was a smaller man. I understand that. A lot of people were actually picking Gamboa to win that fight. What I find very interesting is even after he lost to Crawford, all these years later, he's taken on these younger guys. He gave Tank a pretty good fight. Yes, he got dominated, but he went 12 rounds with him. He landed some nice shots. He showed really good durability and came to fight. He made Devin Haney look very bad, one of Devin's worst performances. So you got to keep in mind, he did this 5-6 years after the Crawford fight. Years after the Crawford fight. When he took on Terence Crawford, he was still a tremendous talent, but Crawford was able to get the job done. But a really good win for Crawford, even if he was a much bigger man. They both made weight at 135. Then Crawford took on Raimundo Beltron, the same man that many felt got robbed against Ricky Burns. He fought Beltron almost to give the guy that deserved to own that title a shot, because he deserved that win against Ricky Burns, but he never got the win. He never owned that title at 135 at the time. So it was only justice. It was only fair. It was almost like when Devin Haney took on Vasil Lomachenko. And I'm not saying Loma got robbed against Teofimo Lopez, but we know that Loma deserved another shot at that belt. And that's what he did for Beltron. He gave him another chance, and he beat him by a very wide, very comfortable unanimous decision. Basically shut him out. After that, in April of 2015, he took on 22-1 Thomas Delorme. Thomas Delorme was always a very solid fighter. He was a guy that would never rise to the occasion. He has no marquee wins. If you look at his entire career, he really doesn't have any marquee wins. He has a lot of marquee opponents: Boots Ennis, Stanianis, Jamal James, Jesse Vargas, Yordenis Ugas. He's faced a lot of really good opposition, and Crawford was one of the most dominant guys to beat him. Now, obviously not as dominant as Boots Ennis was in October of 2021, years later, against a washed version of Delorme who was coming off back-to-back losses. But he stopped him in the 6th round, looked very impressive, got the job done, very impressive fashion. It wasn't his easiest fight. He was having some issues early on, but he broke him down, got the stoppage. That was his first fight at 140, and it was for a WBO belt, so he became a 2-weight champion. Thierry Jean, I'm not going to get into. I mean, it's a nice little win, but Thierry Jean never did anything in the sport. He was a decent fighter. His ability wasn't bad, but he proved nothing, and it didn't elevate Crawford at all. Hank Lundy, that was a gimme fight. It was actually a really cool fight because Lundy was talking a lot in the build-up, and Lundy made the fight really interesting early, but Crawford took him out. One thing I'll acknowledge about the Lundy victory for Crawford is at the time, no one was really dominating Hank Lundy. Everyone was kind of having issues with him. If you look at Delorme, he had a split decision. You look at Mauricio Herrera, he won a very competitive technical decision. You look at Raimundo Beltron, he won a majority decision. You look at John Molina Jr., who stopped him in the 11th round. Molina was losing that fight really badly. He got to come from behind stoppage, similar to how he did against Mickey Bay. So no one really made too much of a statement against Hank Lundy before Terence Crawford, and Crawford is the first man to really dominate him and stop him while being either up on the cards or keeping the fight very competitive. Everyone else won either a very close decision or got to come from behind stoppage. Crawford made a statement and won very impressively. Now, obviously, since then, Lundy's been dominated. He's been washed up for a very long time, but Crawford, I will give him this, he did make a statement against Lundy. He definitely made a statement in that bout. Now, in July of 2016, I felt this was probably Terence Crawford's best win for a little bit. He took on and unified for the first time in his career. He unified against Victor Postal. Postal was a really solid fighter off of ability. He genuinely was a really good fighter. He's not a scrub at all. Even in the last couple of years, he's still shown to be a good name. But at the time, they were Top Rank and Bob Arum, they were setting up Terence Crawford versus Lucas Matisse. All Matisse had to do was beat Victor Postal. And Postal made a statement. He dominated. I mean, yeah, it was a relatively competitive fight, but then eventually he broke Matisse down and knocked him out in the 10th round. I see that the scorecards are on BoxRec for the scorecards prior to the knockout in the Postal Matisse fight. They were never up, so they must have just put them up very recently. And 2 of the 3 judges had Postal up, and 1 of them had Matisse up. Trust me, no one had Matisse up watching that fight. I had it 6-3 Postal. I believe Harold Letterman had it 7-2 for Postal, so he was up very relatively wide, or at least he was clearly up, and then he got the knockout win. First man to stop Lucas Matisse. It was a very impressive victory. And Terence Crawford made a statement against Postal. Yes, he didn't knock Postal out. He didn't get him out of there, but he won a very wide unanimous decision. I mean, I had it super wide. I only scored the fight once, all the way back in 2016 when I was 11 years old. And I had the fight 119-106 Terence Crawford. There's a very good chance if I rewatched that fight, I'd probably have it like 118-107, 117-108. But I had Crawford dominating Postal. He dropped him twice, won a very comfortable decision. It wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing victory from Crawford's end. It wasn't the most entertaining fight, but he made a statement. He won very wide, very impressively against a very good opponent. And even then, when you look at Postal and what he did after that bout, he's another guy who really, aside from Matisse, doesn't have any marquee wins. But you look at the Josh Taylor fight, Josh Taylor obviously ended up going undisputed at 140. The scorecards were very wide for Taylor, but anyone that saw that fight had it 7-5 for Josh Taylor, 6 rounds apiece, 8-4. It was a close fight with the knockdown, obviously. He gave Josh Taylor a really good fight, and then you look at his fight against Jose Ramirez. A lot of people had him beating Jose Ramirez. I believe I only scored the fight once, but I had it a draw when I saw it. Ramirez was 25-0 and a unified champ. Postal fought him 4 years after he fought Terence Crawford and almost beat him. Many people's mind beat him, lost a majority decision. Then he fought Gary Antoine Russell, got stopped, but it was a tough fight for Russell. It was a terrible stoppage. It really should have just been a decision win for Russell, but he gave Russell a good fight in his own right. So Victor Postal was a good win for Terence Crawford. Really good win. I think for a decent amount of time, it was his best win. Then after that, he stopped John Molina Jr. in the 8th round. That's not anything impressive. It doesn't really build on his legacy. I just think it was such a good performance from Crawford. He looked so sharp in that fight. And Molina's a respectable name, and he's nothing great, but Crawford really made a statement in his victory against him. Prior to that fight, he was coming off a Provodnikov win. Again, another fight that was probably being set up for Crawford was Crawford versus Provodnikov, and Molina beat him, so he took on Molina, and Crawford got the very good win. And then you even look at Molina. He wasn't a bad fighter after that. Had a very close fight with Omar Figueroa, who is nothing great, but it was very competitive, and Crawford absolutely demolished Molina. Now, this is, in my opinion, a very underrated win for Terence Crawford. Felix Diaz, who Crawford won by shutting him out and making him quit in the corner after 10 rounds in one of Crawford's most impressive performances of his career. Felix Diaz, you got to keep in mind, Errol Spence was getting a lot of credit for his victory against Lamont Peterson around a very similar time. He got robbed against Lamont Peterson. Anyone that saw that fight had him winning. He won that fight really clearly, in my opinion. Like, it was a close fight, but it was a clear but close fight for Diaz. and Crawford absolutely dominated him. Now, Diaz, another guy, no marquee wins, but just because he doesn't have any marquee wins doesn't mean he's not a good fighter. He's a really good fighter, got robbed against Peterson in my opinion. He does have the Sammy Vasquez win, but Sammy Vasquez got knocked out by Collazo after, but he was a nice little prospect at the time. After his Crawford loss, he was pretty much done. His career basically is finished since then, but that was a really good win for Crawford because Diaz was clearly a super talented individual and Crawford shut him out, made him quit in the corner after 10. Now, Crawford goes undisputed against Julius Indongo. Going undisputed is amazing. Unfortunately, Crawford gets very little credit for the Indongo win because Indongo has turned into a complete, utter can. But at the time, Indongo was coming off knocking out Edward Troyanovsky out in the first round, who was a reigning champion, and then nearly shutting out Ricky Burns, who was also a reigning champion. So I understand it was a very weak, undisputed run for Terence Crawford. It was a very weak opponent to become undisputed against, but it was the main man he could have taken on. He was undisputed, and he was the number 2 guy in the division, bar none. At the time, he was. I don't know what happened to Indongo. I don't know if Crawford completely systematically broke him down after that defeat, but Indongo looked really good prior to fighting Crawford. A lot of people even thought he had a shot of winning. No one was really picking him to win, but a lot of people thought it would be a very tough fight for Crawford. Now, I felt this was Crawford's best win for a little bit. Jeff Horn. Now, Jeff Horn, obviously very weight drained when he fought Crawford. I'm not going to deny that. Obviously got a gift win against Manny Pacquiao prior. One of the worst robberies I think I've ever seen. But it doesn't change the fact that Jeff Horn is a very solid fighter. He technically he beat Manny Pacquiao. He made it very tough for Pacquiao, a very physical fight. Not a great outing from Pacquiao, even if he did get the decision. Horn was a good fighter for sure, and Crawford absolutely dominated him. Complete one-sided schooling. He won every round and then stopped him in the 9th. It was his best win and best performance for a while. He looked absolutely tremendous in that fight. Pacquiao went life, and I gave Horn 4 rounds out of the 12 against Pacquiao, but Pacquiao had to go through hell and back in that fight against Jeff Horn, and Crawford made it look easy. So a really good win for Crawford. Now, Jose Benavidez Jr., not really a good win because he really didn't do much in his career. He's not that great of a fighter. He's an okay fighter, though, Benavidez Jr., for being fair. He gave Danny Garcia a nice little fight. He lost clearly, but he won a good 3-4 rounds in it. And then Jermall Charlo he took on, moving up in weight. A Jermall Charlo at 168 wasn't able to drop Benavidez, but Crawford at 147 was able to stop him. And I understand he was more hydrated against Charlo, but guys, come on. The power difference, you would expect there to be something. But Crawford got him out of there in the 12th. Charlo, I know it was only scheduled for 10, so it wasn't fair. Charlo didn't have as much time as Crawford, but Crawford stopped him and Charlo couldn't. It's not a bad look for Crawford. A lot of people were very critical of his Benavidez performance. I thought it was probably one of his worst performances, but he got the job done. Stopped him in the 12th, and that win isn't bad in my opinion. It's not great, but it's not bad. Amir Khan was a fun fight, but it wasn't a fight anyone necessarily wanted to see. Amir Khan was pretty much washed at this point of his career. I mean, Khan was coming off a couple wins after the Canelo KO loss, but Khan was basically freebie. I think the one thing I give Crawford credit for in the Khan fight is that he was one of the few guys, I think the only guy, we're not going to count Kell Brook because that was recent, the only guy to stop Amir Khan while being up on the scorecards. And I don't mean up like Canelo was up, where 2 judges had him up, but everyone had him losing. I mean actually winning. He was actually beating Khan before stopping him. He was dominating him, actually. So I give him credit for that, but the name isn't that impressive in my opinion. Then Crawford fought Mean Machine. Mean Machine's a nice little win. He had a very tough time with Mean Machine. This is probably the worst performance of his career, by the way, but Mean Machine's a good opponent. I know Virgil Ortiz beat him pretty similarly to the way Crawford did, but that was also after Crawford did it. Mean Machine has a lot of power. He's a dangerous opponent. He wasn't a great fighter off of resume. I mean, he had that draw against Ray Robinson. I thought Mean Machine edged it, but it was close. But since the Virgil Ortiz loss, he won a very impressive win against Michael Fox, and he's a good fighter overall. It wasn't a great win, but it's a nice little win, and it was the guy ranked number 1 the WBO. So since Crawford wasn't fighting Spence, he might as well get rid of that mandatory. Then Crawford fought Kell Brook. I feel he deserves more credit for this win, honestly. I think this is a very underrated win. I understand Kell Brook was weight drained against Crawford, and both of his orbital bones were broken, one from Triple G and one from Spence. But he was looking pretty good prior to that Crawford fight. I know he was moving down in weight, but he looked really good prior to that Crawford fight. He was bouncing back. He came off a couple wins. None of them were against great opponents, but he had some momentum back in his career, and Crawford stopped him in 4 rounds. I thought it would be a much tougher fight for Crawford. I thought Brook would really push him, but Crawford got him out of there really soon, really early. And then after that, he fought Amir Khan and looked really good. Won a very dominant win. Stopped him in 6. It was a very good look from Kell Brook. I understand Khan was washed in his own right, but Brook proved that he wasn't a shell of himself completely, and Crawford got him out of there quick. Sean Porter, another underrated win for Terence Crawford. I mean, yes, I get Porter was or has already lost to Spence and Keith Thurman and Kell Brook in the past, but he was coming off a lot of momentum because a lot of people, including myself, felt he beat Errol Spence. He came off the win against Sebastian Formella, and he looked really good in that fight. I know Formella is nothing great, but he looked really sharp and really good in that fight. Completely shut him out. And Crawford was the first man to stop Shawn Porter ever. The first man. I apologize for looking down. I'm just looking at BoxRec. That's why my eyes haven't been fully on the camera this video. Shawn Porter was never stopped in his entire career, and Crawford stopped him. Now, I know Kenny Porter threw in the towel. I know a lot of people are going to complain about that, but Crawford was going to get him out of there within the next minute at most, probably next 30 seconds. First man to stop Shawn Porter, was winning on the cards as well. It was a tough fight for Crawford, but he got the job done. Really impressive victory, and honestly, it deserves more credit because Shawn Porter is a really good opponent. I felt he beat Errol Spence, and Crawford was able to get him out of there. Then he fought David Avanesian. Avanesian, very underrated win in my opinion. Not a great win by any means, but if you look at Avanesian, he had a lot of momentum before Crawford took him out, and I mean a lot. He took on undefeated Kerman Laharada, stopped him, then rematched that same undefeated fighter, stopped him in a round this time. Kerman Laharada was a nice little opponent as well. He was actually being built up to be a decent name. Nothing great, but decent. Then he stopped Josh Kelly, who was a very touted prospect in England. Got a very good win against Josh Kelly. It was a bloodbath, and he looked very impressive. Got a couple more knockouts, and then Crawford shut him out and knocked him out in the 6th round. So, underrated win. Crawford did what he had to do. Avanesian, not a bad fighter. Not a great name, but not a bad fighter. And obviously, I don't even have to tell you too much about the Errol Spence win as of late. Undisputed. Number 1 versus number 2. Many people had Spence in their top 5 pound-for-pound list. This was the guy everyone wanted Crawford to fight for years, and he wins more dominantly than he dominated. Probably his most dominant win at welterweight. I'm not even trying to be funny, because let's look at his welterweight run. Aside from Jeff Horn, because honestly, I think it was more dominant than Jeff Horn in the way where Spence may have had more offensive success than Horn did, but he took more punishment than Horn, in my opinion. So let's not include Jeff Horn. Benavidez gave him a better fight. Khan gave him a trickier fight. I wouldn't say Khan really gave him much of a fight, to be fair. Mean Machine definitely gave him a better fight. Kell Brook won more rounds, arguably, in 3 rounds completed than Spence did in 8. So I would say it was very close. Porter definitely gave him a better fight. And Avanesian, I wouldn't say that. But really good win from Crawford, obviously. Put him in number 1 pound-for-pound. His resume is tremendous, in my opinion. He used to get a lot of flack for his resume, but if you look at his resume now, you look at it broken down, his record in title fights is 18-0, 15 knockouts. In 8 opponents, he's knocked all 8 of them out in world welterweight title fights. He's 7-0, 6 knockouts in light welterweight title fights, and he's 3-0, 1 knockout in world lightweight title fights. He is 6-0, 4 knockouts in lineal title fights, and he has a record of 10-0, 7 knockouts against former or current world champions, secondary belts excluded. So that includes Ricky Burns, Yuriorkis Gamboa, Raimundo Beltron, Victor Postal, Julius Indongo, Jeff Horn, Amir Khan, Kell Brook, Shawn Porter, and Errol Spence. First to become an undisputed champ in the 4-belt era at 140. First to become undisputed in the 4-belt era at 147. First male to become undisputed in 2 weight classes in the 4-belt era. That's it. Tremendous job from Terence Crawford. I know this video is very long, but it's one that I recommend sticking around if you're really intrigued. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one. God bless. Tell me your thoughts on Terence Crawford's resume. Is he pound-for-pound number 1? I have him at number 2 by barely, but I think he'll reclaim that 1 spot very soon. Either way, clear first ballot Hall of Famer. Have a good one, guys. God bless. I'll see you guys later. Peace.